thank you very much. Happy to be here. I'm just tracking my time because I know we've got just a little under an hour. So in the idea of burnout, I will try not to take us too long in that. And you've already given the introduction, so I don't need to. We will go. Let's see if I can get my slides to work. You kind of mentioned these two, so I just put the objectives up here. So we'll talk about some of the changes we've seen with COVID and stress, talk a little bit about burnout, and then some ideas for resilience and a little bit about kind of mental health too. And I'll put it out there. If somebody has a question, feel free to pop on camera, ask me a question, raise your hand, chat it. I am easily interruptible, which is a good and a bad thing at times, but I will try to stay on task. But if you have a question, feel free to ask it. I always like to think that presentations are not for me, they're for other people. So if you have something you want to hear more about or ask me about, please do so. So these are some of the trends, and I'm sure folks are very aware of these trends. And I'm trying to come at this from both an employer and an employee perspective, but these are definitely some of the trends that we have seen with COVID. I guess I said post, quote unquote, post-COVID, because I don't quite think we're post-COVID yet. We're still mid-COVID, but again, these are some of the trends. Some of them are actually good for burnout. There's definitely flexibility that has been built into the workplace. Some of them are not good for burnout. We've definitely seen, I guess, what we call the dehumanization of employees, a lot more contingent workers. With flexibility, there comes flexibility on both ends of it. So some increased expectations, and definitely the blurring of lines with work and life. And I think that's where we're really seeing a lot of that burnout coming is, can people actually turn it off anymore? And I think, again, great flexibility to be able to take your kids to the doctor during the day, to be able to run groceries if you have time, but it's a lot harder to turn it off. So these are some of the trends, and we'll talk more about how we see these and maybe ways to combat them. So stress, and again, I don't want to go into like a stress 101 too much, but these are a lot of the things we often see, with stress, relationships, mental health. Again, two big things that we've seen a lot with over the last 18 months. Certainly, people are stressed out about careers, financial, people have lost jobs, jobs have changed. Certainly, we're seeing a lot more areas of stress. And stress, it can be good. You've got sort of the lame areas over there where, a red lame, and the green areas over there. And stress can actually motivate us at times. We feel that energy, we feel something, we feel that motivation, and that can be really good. Unfortunately, I think many of us are in this place, which I'm not sure how it appears to everybody else, but for me, the bottom right-hand corner, where we've hit burnout. We've hit kind of these breakdown phases, and we're seeing that just across the board. People are sicker. Mental health is certainly suffering. I think on the next slide, I'll talk about emotional reactivity, which is one of the big things we've seen is people are shorter with each other. We don't give as much grace. We don't give as much okay with everybody. We're a lot shorter. And I think that is coming out of the burnout. Sorry. So again, some reactions and responses that we've seen in adults. This is actually a slide. It was really interesting. I was going back and looking at some of the reactions in adults and children. And a lot of times we separate them, but I was looking at some of the reactions in children, and they were actually fitting the reactions we're seeing in adults. So this idea about returning to younger behaviors, I think we're actually seeing that in adults. I think a lot of people, we talked about this a while ago, where people, sort of the idea about watching Netflix and just this idea of wanting to sort of curl up and like watch TV, watch Netflix, binge, and even the shows that people were watching at some time is this like desire to just return to younger behaviors, return to a time when things weren't quite as stressful. So it was really interesting just to see that in kids. And then emotional reactivity, that's another thing we often talk about with kids, but we're seeing that much more in adults right now too. Again, people are just shorter with each other. I think from a work perspective, certainly uncertainty, this idea about avoidance, we're avoid behaviors or we avoid doing something because it stresses us out, even though we know, and I can say I talked to one of my daughters about this last night. She's 15, who is avoiding things, right? Because it's gotten piled up. But the idea about, well, if you need to address them, you need to actually do them, get them off your plate. And that actually reduces your stress rather than avoidance. But we're seeing a lot of avoidance behaviors, which again, is sort of a pile on. Some of the other things we've really seen lately is this difficulty in sleeping. And if you look at the research, I think more and more, and especially as I get a little bit older, I realize that sleep is actually incredibly important for almost everything that we do. It actually shows that sleep can affect eating, sleep, affects our ability to interact with each other. Sleep affects our ability to actually reduce stress, to exercise, to do everything. And we're seeing more and more sleep issues, not just with people being able to get to sleep, but people being able to stay asleep. And I think that's adding to, our daily interactions as well. So sleep is huge, and we've lost a lot of that. So I'll get into a little bit of dealing with burnout right now. And I like this quote over here that talks about, it's not really stress that kills us. Like, stress really doesn't do anything to us. It's just sort of a thing out there. It's how we react to stress that actually ends up killing us, right? Or ends up getting, maybe not killing us, but, it ends up impacting us. It's how we really deal with it, how we conceptualize it, and what we do to engage it or get rid of it. And then this cup of water, it's not necessarily that the water is about to overflow. The idea here is that if you fill up a cup of water and you hold it for a couple minutes, it doesn't get that heavy. But if you try to hold a cup of water for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days, it suddenly gets really heavy. And it's this idea of, if we keep it all in there and we're trying to just hold it all over time, that is really going to affect us. We have to find a way to, drink some of the water, pour some of the water out, maybe turn off that spigot before it gets up there, figure out ways that we put that cup down. And that, I think, is where people are having trouble, is how do we go from holding this cup of water to either putting it down or reducing what's in that cup of water. All right, so stress and burnout. I'm probably going to talk about other things that is not going to be foreign to anybody, but burnout is not actually a medical diagnosis, although sometimes it can appear as such. And I think what we're seeing is, from a mental health perspective, things like depression seem to be sort of mirroring what we're seeing with burnout. So there's an idea over COVID, people were at home, they weren't out socializing, they were working all the time, they couldn't turn it off. People were having difficulty waking up in the morning, people weren't looking forward to things. Was that burnout or was that depression? And was it depression leading to burnout, burnout leading to depression? What oftentimes were we seeing? And then you add anxiety in there, and anxiety certainly can mirror some of the things that we've seen with burnout. So it isn't a medical diagnosis per se, but there are certainly things that can lead to burnout, which would be a medical diagnosis, or things that would mirror a medical diagnosis. The other thing we know is that there's individual factors, personality traits, family life, we can influence who experiences burnout. One of the things in doing looking into some of the numbers, I'll skip down for a second, but there's data out there, and it was actually fairly consistent data at this point, showing that people who are married and people who have kids are actually experiencing burnout more frequently, or experiencing that. I laugh because I'm both, and my wife works out of the house. She's worked out of the house for years, and so now I'm invading her space. So if she were here, she would probably be echoing everything that I'm saying right now about that. But it was interesting to find that, yes, people that were married and people that have kids were certainly experiencing not just higher levels of burnout, but what we might consider that complete burnout. So their percentages are a lot higher just because of what the demands are. And again, going back to that flexibility, it's awesome that you can do things with your kids, take them places, go grocery shopping during the day, but they're always there too. And you're just unable to sort of remove yourself from that environment. Another study that was done, this is actually almost a year ago now. So I'd say it's probably right in the heart of what we were experiencing with COVID, is that, basically 3/4 of employees were experiencing burnout. It's probably not a surprise to anybody, but it's just interesting to put those numbers to it. Sorry. So, we talked a little bit about the symptoms and outcomes. I think some of the other things is reduced work performance, lack of satisfaction from achievements. And I think that's something, if you hear somebody talking about those things, a sign that potentially there's burnout going on. I mentioned poor sleep, that irritability and reactiveness, that is also huge. So if somebody is much more irritable or reactive than they might normally be, that's probably a pretty good sign that they're experiencing levels of burnout. This idea about lack of concentration. And one of my favorite things is presenteeism. So people are there, but they're just there physically. They're not really doing the work. They're present, but they're not really doing the work. Those are all things that are real signs that somebody is experiencing burnout. I'm going to go back to some of the other causes, and we've mentioned them, but I want to focus on a few of them here. One of them is this idea about lack of control. And I think that's something that people have definitely experienced while we've been in COVID. They feel completely out of control of their situation. Or, when we talk about vaccines and, people are now talking about what's the end game here. People feel out of control about like, when are we going to say we're good to go, right? That's been a huge issue. And so control is really a big thing. And I'm going to talk more about control in a minute. It's one of my favorite things to talk about right now. The idea about, again, caregiving. The other thing that we've seen is this idea about insufficient benefits. And I'll put this out there, both employer and employee side again, is people, I think one of the issues that we've seen as people are experiencing burnout and experiencing more work is kind of the inability to actually use their benefits. We kind of joked, we were joking a while ago about taking time off. And like, what does that even mean anymore? Like I'm at home every single day. Like, do I actually get a vacation? And I can't really go anywhere right now. So what am I actually doing? And that was a big thing that we saw. And this isn't exactly what I started talking about, was people started saying, well, I have time, but I can't take it because there's nowhere to go. We're not allowed to fly or go anywhere. So I could be at home, but I'm not allowed to even leave the house. So I might as well just work, right? And so that's what people were saying, is I might as well just work. I'm not even going to take this downtime because there's really nothing for me to do. Then I think that was okay for a little bit, but now people still aren't really taking their time. They feel like they still can't take that time off. And even when they do, we at work have had to be really cognizant and of doing this, is saying, like, if somebody's off, they're off, right? Don't email them, don't call them, don't do anything unless it's an emergency, because I think we've also gotten to this world of, I know you're off, right? How many times have we sent, and I'm guilty of this, like, I know you're off, but I just want to check in with you on this one thing, right? That's totally inappropriate for me to do. And I think that's what we're running into a lot of times. So it's the idea about giving people that ability to take time off, and then as employees, really setting those boundaries. The other thing we've seen with burnout are the political and social issues going on. Whatever side of the fence you sit with politics, we've seen a lot over the last couple of years. We've seen it, add it to COVID, add some of the social issues we were dealing with. I don't know, again, referring to my kids, we had a teacher a year or two ago who decided it was a great time to tell our kids about some volcano in Wyoming, right? It was like an underground volcano, and that freaked our kids out. And I was like, oh, great, thanks for that, right? That was an amazing thing to add for our kids. But so I think everybody's just experiencing all these additional things. So here's some of the data just on burnout. Again, most people, and I say most because that's what the I guess 67%, right, are have increased stress. And a lot of people are emotionally exhausted. A lot of people are saying that their mental health and their physical health has declined. Increases in anxiety, feeling sad / depression. More and more people irritable, as I've already mentioned. and again, we found that remote workers are actually productive and in some ways more productive. But as I mentioned, that work-life lines, those lines are blurred, and we're seeing that as leading to people having poor mental health. This next slide, so we did a study just on our own clinic last year, and we looked at what our numbers were before and after we went virtual with COVID, and sort of related to the virtualization of mental health services and COVID. And we've seen a couple different things, and that trend has stayed, is that our numbers went significantly up with COVID. So more and more people are seeking mental health services. We've seen most places across the board that I've talked to are seeing 30 to probably up to 60, 70% increases in people seeking out services, which is tough because there's not providers out there to necessarily meet that demand, which I think adds to people's concerns. The other thing we have in here is this idea about the no-show rate, which has actually gone down as well. And one of the things that we saw just from our own burnout with our clinicians is not only were they being asked to see more people, but they had fewer no-shows, and so they had fewer breaks during the day. So it just kind of shows a couple different things. One, the mental health demand just across the board, and then using our own experience of people not getting those breaks and looking at other industries. That's what's happening too, right? No longer do people have this idea about, well, we ended a meeting early, and so I got up and I walked around, or I went here or went there. What we hear from so many people is, I'm just sitting at my desk on a Zoom call, hour after hour after hour, and I'm not actually taking these breaks that I used to be able to take. So how do we help? How do we deal with this? So I'm taking a different approach here today. We'll see how it lands with everybody. And I kind of joke about this, and partly I'm in this field, and so I'm making jokes about myself. I'm not going to talk a whole lot today about yoga. I think I talk about being present, but I don't say mindful anywhere, I think, on my slides. I'm trying to get out of this idea about the way that we deal with burnout is through just self-care. And I'm a huge proponent of self-care, but I also think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do self-care. And I think that is actually stressing people out as well. If you tell somebody, well, just go to yoga, go do this, and they don't have time to do it, I think sometimes it feels like somebody now has an extra chore that they're failing to do. So I'm trying not to talk about that. I want to talk more about kind of global things that I think would help us all with burnout. So we'll see how it works. Let me know how this lands with everybody. So one of the things we know, and again, this is from an organizational perspective. I guess you could look at this from sort of a community societal perspective. There's a few, I guess, building blocks that you might say would lead to burnout success. There's focusing on well-being and resilience, and that's kind of using your benefits and understanding a few things, but also companies supporting that. Trust is a big thing. Making sure that if you feel like you take your time off, that's going to be respected, and it's not going to be, it's not going to meet negative consequences. Feeling like you have trust to have good conversations with other employees. I mean, I think that's another thing, is we've lost connection, and we need to feel like we can trust having conversations with each other. Certainly leadership and communication. Leadership is huge, and I think we need to really think about different ways of providing leadership. And I like to say the leadership can come the top. If you're the CEO of a company, certainly you have leadership. If you are leading a team, if you are in a work group, or if you're just on a meeting with a bunch of people and you're feeling like there needs to be some leadership taking on that role. Everybody has that responsibility. And then looking at ideas with culture and climate. And then I put in a smiley face there. So if we can kind of do all those things, right, I guess that leads to a basic smiley face. So here are some of the things I think organizations can do. And sorry, it's a pretty busy slide. Helping employees connect and build relationships, right? So making time to actually let that happen. Some of the ideas people put out there is getting back to, a few minutes of just talking during meetings. It doesn't just have to be meetings. Like, let's build those connections. If somebody is looking stressed out, reaching out to them, having those talks. The idea about supporting employees equitably, if you look at it, there's still beliefs and some actual data out there that remote and on-site employees are not treated the same still. So looking at how employees are still treated the same. Again, looking at benefits, how we use them and how we give people the ability. And another thing is educating your workforce on mental health. So we do trainings ourselves, and we do a lot in the workplace. Along with the need for clinical services, we have seen a dramatic increase in workplaces asking us to do more mental health training, talking about signs and symptoms of mental health. We do a lot of suicide prevention. We do other things. We've actually seen more and more requests for that since COVID, because I think now people are actually focusing more on that. So that's a good thing. And we hear a lot of really good feedback when companies do that. Again, trust, what do we think about contingent workers? Are they actually cheaper in the long run? If you look at the data on turnover, one would argue they may not be in the long run. And the things you lose with building a deep connection among your workforce might actually be a financial and other negative as well. I'm not going to read all of these. Some of the other things, again, showing appreciation. It's a pretty simple thing. I will talk about gratitude a little bit, but showing kind of these simple things to each other actually has been shown to reduce and help with burnout. Adapting to the current demands of work and life. I was talking about some other trends in mental health and how we deliver services, and people were sort of fighting some of it. And the idea was like, let's not fighting it. We need to adapt to these trends. We can't just fight these trends. Let's adapt to the trends. And so let's start to really figure out how we're going to make these things work. And I don't know that we're always had that mindset, especially if it's one that we don't necessarily agree with or believe in, but that's what's happening. And so we have to learn how to adapt to them. And then I'll talk more about culture and climate here in a minute. From an employee perspective, evaluate all your options, like have conversations with your supervisors and work to set boundaries. I think that's a huge piece of fighting burnout. Seeking that support from coworkers. I always have to kind of check myself, being that I come from a mental health, group, right? And so we talk probably more than we should talk sometimes, right? So it's easy for me to say, seek that support. But I do think more and more people, it would be, if you haven't done it, you'd probably be astounded to find how many people are struggling with something, right? And we often just talk about saying, like, all you need to do is ask somebody how they're doing and really listen, and you'll probably actually have a really good conversation. And again, that comes to this connectiveness that I think we've largely lost. But that, it doesn't sound like, oh, that's a great way to combat burnout, but it really is. It's really being able to connect, talk with each other, and let other people know that you're there as a support. And it's also creating a different culture and environment around talking about these things. And I think that's what we often find, is that people often feel like they're the only one dealing with something. They're the only one who can't handle this. They're the only one whose wife has been working at home and now she's annoyed because you're everywhere she wants to be, right? That's not the case. More and more people actually are dealing with it, and we feel like we're alone, and that adds to our stress and burden. And it's just not the case. I do say try a relaxing activity. Yes, I do say yoga is good to do. It's not the only thing. I will come back to control again. Exercise and sleep is huge, right? There's new sleep apps out there. There's actually something called Sleepio that we recently got access to, ways to really track and monitor your sleep, and it uses known evidence-based methods to actually help with sleep. But there's things that you can do out there to help get sleep. It is one of the most important things. I am going to let you read these, and I will skip to my next slide. So I want to talk about emotional intelligence. Sorry. Is my chat coming up? I should have turned that off. I don't know if things are popping up on my screen or not. So emotional intelligence, are they coming up? Yeah, don't read my chats. No, I don't think there's anything in there. I forgot to turn them off. So yeah, emotional intelligence. And again, this kind of comes back to how we can all help each other. But part of this is being self-aware. Like, are we aware even of what's going on within ourselves, right? And if we're aware of what's going on with ourselves, then we can help to manage ourselves. And that's that emotional reactivity piece that I was talking about. So truly understanding, where are my triggers? What is setting me off these days? And how can I work to manage that myself, and so I can manage it as I interact with other people. It helps with being socially aware. Again, that's one of the things I think, especially when we're on Zoom all the time and all this, we've kind of lost this awareness of each other. And actually understanding yourself allows you to understand other people better, and then we can manage those relationships. So one of the things, and you don't have to do it right now, we don't have to talk about it, but I like to think about this, this exercise of thinking about, it's always nice to kind of write down, like, what are the top 3 things or the things that a supervisor or colleague has done that actually you found helpful, just in terms of being a good supervisor or colleague, but in terms of what they did to actually help you with burnout. And then what were the 3 things that somebody did that didn't, or led to more of a toxic environment? I think it's nice to think about that and think about, are we doing the good or the bad ourselves and to other people? Excuse me. So it's just a nice exercise. Again, you don't have to we don't have to talk about them right now, but I would say, go ahead and do that. Give that some thought. Think about that in terms of where you are with your burnout, how you're experiencing it, and then are you inadvertently potentially adding to it for yourself or for other people? So I know I kept talking about control, but this is now one of my new favorite slides. Actually get to it correctly. I think this is something that we have lost as well. This understanding of what we can actually control. And this goes back to self-awareness. So being aware of yourself, being aware where you are, where you sit, and thinking, like, what can I actually control? It may not seem like that helps with burnout, but I think it's actually one of the best ways to combat burnout. And you can see up here, this is one of the ones I think that actually came out of COVID. So, and this goes back to the toilet paper, when nobody could buy toilet paper, right? That was annoying, absolutely, but we had no control over that. Most people had no control over whether there was toilet paper at the store. And I think we got so upset by it that it took on a life of its own. Yes, it was annoying, but we really had no control over it. And so you have to kind of think about, okay, what do I need to do in this moment? My choices are to get really agitated and to let this affect me for the rest of the day, or think, like, I just have no control over this. The only thing I have control over right now is how I react to there not being toilet paper. We can't control how long it's going to last. We can't control what is going to happen. I like to read about this philosophy called Stoicism, and it talks a lot about things you can and can't control, and what you put out there in the world, and what actually makes people feel good. So things that make us feel good are things that have meaning, things that have meaning to us. Again, going back to that self-awareness idea, it doesn't have to be work, it can be other things. But it also goes out there in terms of what you can control. And one of the things I really like about it is it says, you can control what you can do. You cannot control how anybody else is ever going to respond to you. As much as we think we can, or we think we can force somebody to respond in a certain way, we can't. We can control our own consistency and what we put out there. We'll never be able to control how somebody else responds. And I think for me and other people I've talked to and seen, wrapping our heads around that has actually helped with burnout issues, because you say, this is what I can do, right? And if I do what I can do, I don't know what's going to happen elsewhere, but I just can't really control that. I can only do what I can do and focus on what I can focus on. That is one of the biggest things I think that really helps with burnout. There are other steps you can take, like to relieve stress. If there's an issue that's fixable, put an action plan together. Again, I'll go back and use my daughter last night. It's like, this is a fixable issue. We just need to get a plan together. If it's not fixable, this is where reaching out for other support comes in. Maybe you just need other support, right? If you can get rid of it, then get rid of it. But maybe sometimes just having to talk and vent about it, that's about all you can do. You can't really fix it. And then, and this goes back to that reactivity. Are we overreacting to things at times? And how is that leading to our own burnout and maybe burnout in other people? If you feel like you're overreacting to something, or if somebody tells you you're overreacting to something, it's nice to challenge that idea and think like, maybe I did, right? Did I really need to react the way I did to that? And one of the things I'd say, and this will get to, which I know my time is running out a little bit, but I will talk a little bit about this later, is like the idea of engaging nicely with our colleagues. And if we overreact to something, there is nothing better than an actual good apology. I think most people accept apologies pretty well. And especially if it's genuine and it's just like, hey, listen, I know I did this. I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to. However you need to do it. And then just kind of leave it. And again, that goes back to this area of trust as well, right? If you are able to apologize to other people, that actually helps us set up trusting relationships. They feel like they can then have sort of this real interaction with you too. It's not that you just get to blow up whenever you want now and just apologize for it, right? But it does create this connection with each other. It does create this ability to have conversations that you probably never really thought you would be able to have with other people. So self-management actually, and this goes back to the self-awareness to self-management, and a little bit about what I just was talking about, is our ability to understand what we're putting out there into the world. And it actually is really important. And one of the things that we know, and again, you can kind of think about domino effects here, is that when people are on the receiving end of a rude email, a rude comment, an angry customer, their performance actually goes down after that. And sometimes it can bleed into their home life as well. People can kind of take that with them. And this goes into this idea about workplace incivility. That's actually increasing. And I think we've seen that increase with COVID, and we've seen, again, this emotional reactivity and all this stuff. That also, the more we are met with that, the worse we feel, our performance goes down, and that is leading to our burnout as well. Empathy is huge. I have a video, I might skip it and come back to it, but it talks about empathy versus sympathy, or maybe I'll show it because I think it's a really good one. It's by Brené Brown, but talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy. I think too often we provide sympathy, and that's recognizing hardship and sort of giving comfort. Empathy is actually, again, it goes back to this idea about being self and socially aware. It is actually taking on somebody else's feelings, understanding where they might actually be coming from. And empathy sort of has this like soft tone to it, but we actually know for people who have empathic leaders, employees feel more innovative, they're more engaged, they're more likely to stay at a job, and they feel better able to navigate all these obligations that we're all dealing with right now. And again, empathy does not have to be supervisor to subordinate. It's across the board. Just showing empathy with other colleagues, again, that lets people feel like the stress isn't all on them, that they're not just holding that cup of water forever. They can dump some of that water out. They can drink some of that water. They can get rid of it somehow because somebody else is showing care, true care about how they might be feeling. So I will play this video. It's just a couple minutes long. Let me know if you can hear it. Hear it?
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, "Hey, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed." And then we look and we say, "Hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone." Sympathy is, "Ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich?" Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So that was by Brené Brown. It's one of my favorite videos, and you can really kind of use it in many different ways. Here are some tips on just being empathic, thinking about ways to be empathic. And I think, again, one of the things as we're talking about burnout is, and kind of what Brené was saying too, is people may not remember exactly what you say, and you may not say the exact right thing, but they'll remember that you tried to say something, right? Or that you sat with them and how you made that person feel. And again, if you think about that, if you think about times that you've felt burnout yourself and somebody has just engaged with you at an empathic level, think about sort of that release. You can almost feel the release sometimes of it just made you feel better, right? Didn't really matter what they said, it just made you feel better that they were there. So a couple of the other things, it's around leadership styles. I think this is something that we always have to think about now. And again, whether you are the CEO, whether you're leading a team, whatever you're leading, we have the ability to think about how we're leading things. And I think we have to think a lot more about that these days. And we really have to think about what are we doing, right? And if we have a bunch of burned out people, do I really want to just tell them exactly what they need to do, right? And harp on them? It's probably not going to work. And so we really have to think about, how am I engaging a team that is likely burned out, that may be fully or partially remote? And it's kind of up to me. And I think this is a thing, again, we talk about burnout and this whole idea about self-awareness. It's kind of on me to think about, how am I going to engage these folks? It may be uncomfortable for me, but that's really what I need to do. I really need to have conversations in a different way. it may be uncomfortable for me to express some vulnerability, but if I don't do that, am I going to lose this team? I mean, I think that's the things we need to start thinking about some of these days or these days. You know, thinking about climate as well, and really getting to this idea about focusing on meaning. And I think that's one thing that we really, that's huge again for burnout is what's the meaning people have? Why are they coming to work? Are we expressing that meaning for them? And if it's not so much the meaning they derive out of work, how is work helping them get the meaning outside of work, right? Is it that they need to come to work because they really feel like they have to make a paycheck? And that's fine, because that paycheck then is allowing them to take care of a parent, a kid, so what is the meaning that they're actually deriving from? And so figuring out how you have a climate focused on meaning. Meaning is huge. People need to know why they're doing something. They need to really feel it. And if you have meaning, again, stress is a lot easier to deal with when you know why you're experiencing the stress. If you don't know why you're experiencing the stress, it is a lot more difficult to deal with. And at some point, you're going to say, this really isn't worth it. And people are going to take off. I will say, again, all these things have domino effect. Gratitude is huge as well. Just simply expressing gratitude for things during the day. So this is an exercise that you can do. So if you want to use your hand, so I'll hold up my hand, I guess mirror, and I've got that background on, so it's hard to see, right? So if you think about your pinky finger, right? And this is something you can do. You can do this with a team, right? You can do this with other people. You can do this with your family. What's one small thing I feel grateful for? You know, you think about like your ring finger, like what's a relationship that I feel grateful for? I would say to people, if you do the middle finger, you got keep at least two other fingers up, right? Not just the middle finger. What's one big thing that you're grateful for? Your pointer finger is like, what's some one thing in my environment I can point to that I feel grateful for? My thumb, you can point that kind of back at yourself. What's one thing about me that I'm grateful for? And if you want to think about like your fist as a whole, it's like, what's something as a group, or what's something of society? What's something about your workplace that you feel grateful for? I think, you know, again, these kind of things can really help people deal with burnout, and it can really help you think about what is it about this situation that I'm grateful for, or that provides meaning for me. And that I think can help with these ideas about burnout too. So I'm gonna stop for a second. See if there's any questions right now. If anybody has questions, I know we've got about 10 minutes left, or maybe even less.
Thanks, Matt. I want to invite folks to type questions into the chat, or feel free to turn on your mic and camera if you've got any questions that you want to bring forward. I'll share just an observation that I've had recently and see if you have any thoughts on it. Before this last year, I always thought of burnout as like a place that you arrive to, and then there needs to be a change. And it's just been in this past year that in my own experiences and talking with others, that I've sort of come to understand burnout as like this state that you can move in and out of. And so I really appreciate a lot of what you shared today about just recognizing the symptoms and then trying to think of some strategies, even if you can't have all the strategies at once. Maybe picking one or two that you can work on to kind of bring yourself out of a state of burnout.
Yeah, I think burnout, definitely you can come in and out of it. You know, again, my own experiences, I think I go in and out of it, you know, a lot. And sometimes, honestly, sometimes I get a good night's sleep, and that is helpful. Other times I get a project off my plate, and then I can think about other things, and that can really be helpful. But yeah, I think you definitely are in and out of burnout. I don't think you're burnout or not, right? I mean, unless you're there is an idea about burnout being a continuum, and at some point you do hit sort of extreme burnout, and that might be something where you really do have to make a huge change to get out of, right? That, we see that, honestly, we see that in mental health a lot, right? Is people, they do hit that level of burnout where like day in, day out, they are seeing people, they're hearing people discuss really difficult things. And if you see somebody hit that level, maybe it is time to think about something different. But I think before that, you certainly, I think, are in and out of burnout. Robin, I saw you pop in there.
Thank you, Matt, first for the presentation. I'm the Director of Workforce Services, and I have to tell you, our office is going through this two and threefold, and we kind of go in and out of it because we thought we were kind of coming out of a pandemic, and then all of a sudden we're back into it, and it's this feeling that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. What really resonated with me, though, is what we're seeing with telework options is there's no shutting down. I think people you're literally on just about 24/7. And I think we need to come up with ways to really resolve that issue so that when you are home, you're home and you're not working and you're not looking at emails and you're not answering that ridiculous email that could have been sent the next morning. And so what I've started doing with that, to the extent that I can, we do certainly have those emergency situations that we have to address, but to the extent that I can, I will put on there, I'll write the email out so I don't forget it. And then you can schedule it to then go the first thing the next morning. So just something I've started working on. I think it's beneficial, and just one of the tricks that we all need to start looking at to do, but also we need a number of other options that we can work on for the same, just so we can kind of come out of this and feel a little bit more relief moving forward. So thank you so much for this presentation. It's been very beneficial. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, certainly we have, we have technology that can help us with these things, right? And I think we have rules. Sometimes I think we just need to put in rules in place, right? To say like, listen, as a team, as a whatever, here's what we're not going to do anymore, right? We're going to hold on these emails. We're going to do this. We're going to let people. And I think putting those rules in place, if you practice them long enough, become more of a habit. And also, if you go back to that idea about leadership, communication, trust, I think putting that out there to people and saying like, listen, if you don't respond to this email tonight, you will have a job tomorrow, right? We're trying to set this climate, this environment such that we know over the long run, we want you here, right? And yes, getting on an email might be great, but if that burns you out such that you do feel like you need to move on, what good have we done in the long run? We want people here, and we're going to make these, what might seem like silly rules up front. We're going to do that because we think it's the right thing to do. And, you're going to have people who are going to be cynical about it and this and that, but I think over time that habit will take place and people will really appreciate that.
Well, like you said, just from management, making it okay to do that and making it, acceptable to not be on all the time, I think is a first step down that road. So again, Thank you.
And I think another thing, and I know Meredith, you're going to shut us off in a sec, but another thing is giving people the okay to use. People always like the mental health day, I think has a horrible connotation to it anymore, right? But mental health is healthcare, right? And giving people the ability to take the time that they need to sort of reset themselves is as important as going to the cardiologist, is going to get other types of care. Like, we need to do that as human beings. We need to do that. And you have some people who think, oh, somebody's just slacking off, but more often than not, that person's going to come back stronger because they need that time.